of the 9 sessions of Anna Karenina with Roxana Robinson. I did want to make a point of thanking those of you who've been able to send in contributions. We're very grateful. Of course, it's a free program, but we're very grateful for them. Thank you. So, Roxana, are you ready?
I am ready.
Okay, good.
So, hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for coming this afternoon to another session on Anna Karenina, one of the greatest novels ever written. So I hope you are enjoying it and feeling proud that you're engaged with it. So this is part 5, and remember that Tolstoy wrote this over a period of 4 years, and several times he just stopped writing it, and it was embarrassing to his publisher, who was publishing it in a periodical, and it became very popular, so people would rush to get the magazine when it came out, only to find that once again Tolstoy had decided not to write this for this issue. So, and he didn't really have a plan. He would just say to his editor, I didn't write it this time. So he was living his life while he was writing this book. And as with many novelists, he was recording in his writing what he was thinking about and the things that he was living through. So religion became an increasingly important part of his life, and he starts exploring it in the book. And I will read from page 440, and I'm going to skip around a bit, but I'm starting on page 440. And this is Levin when he realizes that he will have to take communion, and therefore he has to have confession, has to be confessed before he can get married in the Russian Orthodox Church. And Levin doesn't really have a clear sense of what he believes. He's full of trepidation about committing himself in any way. He's also very dedicated to the idea of integrity and the truth. So he doesn't want to lie, especially to a person of principle, but he doesn't want to get involved in something he doesn't believe in either. So he's full of anxiety about this scene, but he knows he has to go through with it. So he makes an appointment. Stiva makes an appointment for him, and he goes in to see the priest to be confessed. He went up the steps and turning saw the priest, an elderly man with a thin graying beard and tired, kindly eyes. He was standing by a lectern, leafing through the service book. After bowing slightly to Levin, he at once began reading prayers in an accustomed voice. When he finished, he bowed to the ground and turned to face Levin. Christ stands here invisibly and receives your confession, he said, pointing to the crucifix. Do you believe everything that is taught by the Holy Apostolic Church? The priest went on, turning his eyes from Levin's face and folding his hands under the stole. I have doubted. I doubt everything, Levin said, in a voice he himself found unpleasant, and fell silent. The priest waited a few seconds to see whether he would say anything more, and then, closing his eyes in a quick provincial patter with a stress on the os, said, doubts are in the nature of human weakness. Oop, I'm going to turn off my mail so we don't get noises. Sorry. Doubts are in the nature of human weakness, but we must pray that God in his mercy will strengthen us. What particular sins do you have? He asked without the slightest pause, as if trying not to waste time. My chief sin is doubt. I doubt everything, and for the most part, live in doubt. Doubt is in the nature of human weakness, the priest repeated the same words. What is it that you doubt predominantly? I doubt everything. I sometimes even doubt the existence of God, Levin said involuntarily, and was horrified at the impropriety of what he had said. But his words did not seem to make any impression on the priest. What doubts can there be of the existence of God? He hastened to say with a barely perceptible smile. Levin was silent. What doubt can you have of the existence of the Creator when you behold his creations? The priest went on in a quick, habitual manner. Who adorned the heavenly firmament with lights? Who clothed the earth in its beauty? How can it be without a Creator, he said, glancing questioningly at Levin. Levin felt that it would be improper to enter into a philosophical debate with a priest, and therefore he said in answer only what had a direct bearing on the question. "I don't know," he said. "You don't know? Then how can you doubt that God created everything?" the priest said in merry perplexity. "I don't understand anything," Levin said, blushing and feeling that his words were stupid and could not help being stupid in such a situation. I'm skipping now. "You're about to enter into matrimony, and it may be," said the priest, "that God will reward you with offspring. Is it not so? Well, then what sort of upbringing can you give your little ones if you don't overcome in yourself the temptation of the devil, who is drawing you into unbelief? If you love your child, being a good father, you will not desire only wealth, luxury, and honor for him. You will desire his salvation, his spiritual enlightenment. Is it not so? What answer will you give when an innocent child asks you, 'Papa, who created everything that delights me in the world? The earth, the waters, the sun, the flowers, the grass?' Will you really say to him, 'I don't know'? You cannot not know, since the Lord God in his great mercy has revealed it to you. Or else your little one will ask you, 'What awaits me in the life beyond the grave?' What will you tell him if you don't know anything? How will you answer him? Will you leave him to the temptations of the world and the devil? That's not good," he said, and stopped, inclining his head to one side and looking at Levin with meek, kindly eyes. Levin made no reply. Now, not because he did not want to get into into an argument with the priest, but because no one had ever asked him such questions. And before his little ones asked him such questions, there was still time to think how to answer. On returning home that day, Levin experienced the joyful feeling of having ended his awkward situation, and ended it in such a way that he had not needed to lie. Apart from that, he was left with the vague recollection that what this kindly and nice old man had said was not at all as stupid as it had seemed to him at first, and that there was something in it that needed to be grasped. Not now, of course, Levin thought, but sometime later on. Levin felt more than ever that there was something unclear and impure in his soul, and that with regard to religion, he was in the same position that he so clearly saw and disliked in others, and for which he reproached his friend Zviashsky. Levin was especially happy that evening, which he spent with his fiancée at Dolly's, and explaining his excited state to Stepan Arkadyevich. He said that he was as happy as a dog that has been taught to jump through a hoop, and having finally understood and done what was demanded of it, squeals, wags its tail, and leaps in rapture onto the tables and windowsills. So you probably know that I chose this passage because of the dog. The dog is such a great presence here. And look at the way the passage unfolds with Levin, as he is at the beginning of every scene, being clumsy, socially awkward, partly confrontational. The first thing he says is, "I doubt." That's the opposite of faith. The very, very fundamental opposite of faith is to doubt. So he is opposing the priest and the church in every way he can. And the way he connects with the priest is through his physical presence, his personal humanity, his meek, tired eyes, his kindliness, his refusal to oppose Levin, the sense that he's a living person. And that's what Levin and Tolstoy find so deeply engaging and can't oppose on a fundamental level. So the priest is kindly and mild and simply repeats these questions, and he asks the questions that Levin himself and Tolstoy himself cannot really answer, and they are about the nature of nature itself. So if you were to ask the questions that Levin is most engaged in, it would be questions about nature, about the sun, the earth, the grass, the way the stars look at night, all those things that Levin finds so moving and so powerful in his life are the very things that the priest is asking him to think about in terms of a child. Instead of abstractions, instead of the glory of God or the Virgin Mary. He's talking about children and the landscape. And those presences are so powerful and so important to Levin that he loses his impetus to challenge the church and to challenge this minister, this priest. And I just draw your attention to this wonderful ending in which Levin himself compares himself to a dog, an animal said to be beneath us in the scale of being, the order of beings. But there's a wonderful image of a dog who's finally figured out what he's being taught to do, which is not to jump on the mantelpiece or onto tables, but to do something else. But when he realizes the task he's been given, when he's able to perform it, he explodes with rapture and allows everyone around him to celebrate the joyful nature of his understanding. So just be aware of what Tolstoy is doing in this passage. He's asking us to consider one of the great, great questions that man has ever considered since he or she put pen to paper, the question of religion. Is there a God? What is God? What does God mean? And he goes through these questions and he shows us what Levin is thinking, which is completely resistant. He opposes everything. And then is gradually, through his own nature, which is one we've come to know, he is gradually drawn into this notion of understanding the point of religion, the point of these questions, feeling a sense of compassion and connection to the priest, and then compares himself to a dog who has learned to jump through a hoop. It's a brilliant passage. It's a brilliant movement of thought and action. And Levin, this counterpart to Tolstoy, the character that I think of as his counterpart, is drawn so, he's always made to be so comical, so sympathetic, clumsy, but at the same time endearing. And I think it's sort of, this is the apotheosis of the clumsy, endearing, unaware, but tries, a character who's trying hard is this character, the dog who learns how to jump through a hoop and jumps up on tables. So religion became increasingly important to Tolstoy in the next decade, and he challenged the Russian Orthodox Church to the point at which he was considered an enemy of it. But by then he was so important as a writer that he really couldn't be challenged by anyone. He would have become a martyr if he'd been arrested or chastised, but he really took on the Russian Orthodox Church, and for all the reasons that organized religion have often been challenged, claiming that it was hypocritical, that there was much deceit in it, and sort of traditional, conventional challenges to the church itself. He became interested in an earlier sect called the Old Believers, which meant that he started to wear peasant clothes, and he went on pilgrimages from one holy site to another, wearing peasant shoes as well. Excuse me. And he became more and more challenged it became more challenging at the idea of any religion, and had become a dedicated pacifist. And as time went on, he himself became the center of a kind of religious cult, I think called the Tolstoyans. And people sort of gathered around him, and his ideas became perceived as terribly important. It wasn't religious, but it was cultish. So as I say, religion became more and more important to him, and he finally gave up writing fiction because he thought it was insignificant and superficial. But in this passage and in this book, he's still considering religion as one of the great questions, but it has not yet overtaken him. And remember, we are thinking of the three elements in the style in his writing as velocity, intensity, and empathy. And these big questions, the themes that he's dealing with are family, marriage, adultery, morality, and nature, And in this one, and last time we added death. And in this part, we are adding religion and the whole idea of art. So the next passage I will read relates to art. As somebody pointed out, Levin and, Vronsky, let me find the page and then I'll focus on what I'm trying to say. Vronsky and Anna leave very suddenly. They leave Petersburg very suddenly. And one of you wrote in and said, could you please explain why he does this in 3 sentences? It's a huge decision. It changes their lives. All of a sudden, they give up on the divorce and they leave without Seryozha. They leave Russia. And I can't speak for Tolstoy. I can't explain why he does that. But I can tell you that as a novelist, there are times when I am writing about a subject or a group of characters. The next page I'm going to read from is 466. When I'm reading about a subject or a group of characters and I get to the end of it, I've said everything I have to say about this group of people and this subject at this time. And then I want to move to something else. And it feels like that in the text to me, that he's told us how Anna feels about Seryozha. He's told us about how she feels about the divorce. He's told us about how Karenina feels. And so now this velocity takes over again. And he simply says, they left Petersburg and they've started a new life. So here they are in Italy, page 466. The old neglected palazzo with stucco moldings on its high ceilings and frescoes on its walls, with mosaic floors, heavy yellow damask curtains on its high windows, urns on consoles and mantelpieces, carved doors and somber halls hung with pictures. This palazzo, once they had moved into it, by its very appearance, maintained the agreeable illusion in Vronsky that he was not so much a Russian landowner, a chief equerry without a post, as an enlightened amateur and patron of the arts, and also a modest artist himself, who had renounced the world, connections, ambition for the woman he loved. The role chosen by Vronsky with his move to the palazzo was a complete success. And having met some interesting people through Golenishev's mediation, he was initially at peace. Under the guidance of an Italian professor of painting, he painted sketches from nature and studied medieval Italian life. Medieval Italian life had recently become so fascinating for Vronsky that he even began wearing his hat and a wrap thrown over his shoulder in a medieval fashion, which was very becoming to him. So now I'm skipping to page 470, and we're talking about Mikhailov, who's the artist that Vronsky and Anna come to meet. And they've heard that he's a very good painter. He's Russian, so that interests them. And he's painted a big religious painting, and so they go to see it. And Mikhailov hears that they're coming, and Mikhailov is thinking about what it means to have the public looking at your work. And once again, I feel that this character, this artist, is a stand-in for Tolstoy. And all of you who are writers, and I know a lot of you are, will recognize this feeling in which your connection to the work itself becomes a sort of blurred, and you can't remember if it's you or the work that's being looked at, and you can't remember what your feelings are about it. So Tolstoy brilliantly presents this notion of this uncertainty, this kind of foggy area in which the artist stands with the public looking at the work. About his picture, which now stood on the easel, he had one judgment in the depths of his soul, that no one had ever painted such a picture. He did not think that his painting was better than any of Raphael's, but he knew that what he wanted to convey and did convey in this picture, no one had ever conveyed before. He knew that firmly and had known it for a long time, from the very moment he had begun painting it. Nevertheless, people's opinions, whatever they might be, were of great importance for him and stirred him to the bottom of his soul. Every observation, however insignificant, which showed that the judges saw at least a part of what he saw in this picture, stirred him to the bottom of his soul. He always ascribed to his judges a greater depth of understanding than he himself had, and expected something from them that he himself did not see in his picture. And often, in the opinions of viewers, it seemed to him that he had found it. So then we go through a sort of an excruciating passage in which Anna and Vronsky and Golenischev, look at the painting and make observations about it, which drive him crazy because they don't know anything about art, but they all have opinions. And that's what it's like to be an artist, because everyone will look at your work and they will all have opinions, as they should. Art is meant for everyone, but they never see what the artist meant to put in that picture. So the artist is forced to listen to people say things about the picture which aren't true and feel like excoriations to him. So the fact that Mikhailov, we're given the sense that Mikhailov is a real, true artist, that he paints paintings because he must, because he has something that he must say. He has gone to art school. He understands all the technique, the elements of technique, which is something that Vronsky pretends separates him from Mikhailov, because Vronsky never took that kind of training. And Vronsky says technique, that's very important. When he says that, Mikhailov understands him to mean all he has is technique. All he has is the knowledge of how to put the paint on the canvas. And Mikhailov feels offended. Vronsky actually means he's better trained than I am. But there is this shadow land in between the artist and the public, in which no one can communicate with anyone else. So Mikhailov hears everything wrong, and the people who are speaking understand that they have no way of dealing with this. Just as Levin had no way of dealing with the idea of faith, the public has no real way of dealing with art. They manage as best they can. And then Mikhailov is asked to paint Anna's portrait, which he does. So I'm skipping to page 478. Generally, and so you know all this, but Mikhailov comes to paint the portrait. Generally, once they got to know him better, they very much disliked Mikhailov with his reserved and unpleasant, as if hostile attitude. And they were glad when the sittings were over. The wonderful portrait was left with them, and he stopped coming. Golenischev was the first to voice a thought they had all had, namely that Mikhailov was simply envious of Vronsky. Or let's not say envious, because he has talent, but it vexes him that a courtier and a wealthy man who is also a count, they do all hate that, without much effort does the same, if not better, as he who has devoted his life to it. Above all, it's education that he lacks. Vronsky defended Mikhailov, but in the depths of his soul, he believed it, because to his mind, a man of a different, inferior world had to be envious. Anna's portrait, the same subject painted from nature by himself and by Mikhailov, ought to have shown Vronsky the difference between himself and Mikhailov, but he did not see it. He merely stopped painting Anna's portrait after Mikhailov finished, deciding that it was now superfluous. However, he went on with his painting from medieval life. And he himself, and Golenischev, and especially Anna, found it very good, because it looked much more like famous pictures than Mikhailov's picture did. Mikhailov, meanwhile, though he had been much taken up with the portrait of Anna, was even more glad than they were when the sittings ended, and he did not have to listen to Golenischev's talk about art anymore, and he could forget about Vronsky's painting. He knew that it was impossible to forbid Vronsky to toy with painting. He knew that he and all the dilettantes had every right to paint whatever they liked, but he found it unpleasant. It was impossible to forbid a man to make a big wax doll and kiss it. But if this man with the doll came and sat in front of a man in love and began to caress his doll the way the man in love caressed his beloved, the man in love would find it unpleasant. Mikhailov experienced the same unpleasant feeling at the sight of Vronsky's painting. He felt it ridiculous, vexing, pathetic, and offensive. Vronsky's enthusiasm for painting in the Middle Ages did not last long. He had enough taste for painting to be unable to finish his picture. The picture came to a stop. He vaguely felt that its defects, little noticeable in the beginning, would become striking if he went on. The same thing happened with him as with Kardashov, who felt he had nothing to say and kept deceiving himself by saying that his thought had not ripened, that he was nurturing it and preparing his materials. But Kardashov was embittered and tormented by it, while Vronsky could not deceive and torment himself, still less become embittered. With his peculiar resoluteness of character, without explaining anything or justifying himself, he ceased to occupy himself with painting. But without this occupation, his life and Anna's, who was surprised by his disappointment, seemed so boring to him in this Italian town. The palazzo suddenly became so obviously old and dirty, so unpleasant, the sight of stains on the curtains, the cracks in the floors, the chipped stucco of the cornices. And so boring became this ever the same Kardashov, the Italian professor and the German traveler, that a change of life was necessary. They decided to go to Russia, to the country. In Petersburg, Vronsky intended to make a division of property with his brother and Anna to see her son. The summer they planned to spend on Vronsky's big family estate. So in this passage, as I say, Tolstoy is really exploring the big ideas. And here he's dealing with the question of art. Be aware of the beautiful, the elegance of the metaphor of the palazzo. It's not a metaphor, it's a presence, it's a real setting, but it works as a metaphor as well. In the beginning, in the first reference to the palazzo, it's elegant, it's venerable, it's historical. There's a Tintoretto in it, by the way. Imagine renting a palazzo that had a Tintoretto in it. It has old damask curtains, so it's sort of the epitome of the grand Italian aristocratic life. And they enter into it because they're entitled to that. They rent a palazzo with a Tintoretto in it. The mosaic floors, the hallways hung with paintings. So we're invited to enter into this palazzo as if we were entering into the halls of art. And once we're in there and we see that Vronsky is entering into the idea of Italian medieval life, we find that it is increasingly false and inauthentic. The way we learn that very early on is that terrible description of Vronsky wearing a special hat and throwing a stole over his shoulders in a way that makes him look like a medieval Italian. Tolstoy understands, and we understand, that that's a terrible, inauthentic note, and that Vronsky is pursuing the appearance of things rather than the thing itself. He explores that further in presenting this wonderful character, this crusty, grumpy, curmudgeonly artist, Mikhailov, who is poor and unsuccessful, really, mean to his wife, can't afford the rent, but is driven to create art in a way that Vronsky isn't. So Tolstoy is saying, what is real art? The painting that he's done, which is a 19th century Russian painting of a religious scene, a Christian scene, doesn't sound to me particularly interesting. It doesn't sound as though he's doing anything that's radically new, but he's driven to do it. And we understand that it is that drive, it is that impetus that comes from the soul, that's what Tolstoy perceives to be the core of art. What's at the core of this? It's authenticity again, which we find a recurrent drumbeat in this book. So Mikhailov, who is an authentic artist, becomes more and more the counterpart to the challenger, the opposite of Vronsky, who is a man playing a part. And I said earlier that one of the ways to look at this book is as the answer to the question of how should a man live his life. And somebody said, why is it not also the way a woman should live her life? And I just think, in my view, the women are only given one role, which is a wife, and they interpret that in 3 different ways: Dolly, Anna, and Kitty. But their roles are really the same. They are to be homemakers and mothers and angels of goodwill, and they do or they don't. But that's really their only task in the outer world. Whereas the men are given very, very different places in society in which to live. And Vronsky is interesting because he changes. So when we first meet him, so we have Stiva, who is this good-natured but completely feckless husband, but a solid citizen at work, and he's a bureaucrat. We have Levin, who is an uncomfortable man who loves the land, is not a bureaucrat, hates bureaucracy, is dedicated to the landscape. We have Karenina, who is a dedicated bureaucrat and a man of great integrity and responsibility, unlike Stiva. And we have Vronsky, who has that very rich and fully realized life in the military. He's different from the other men. He is not a family man. So he's the opposite of a family man. He lives a life in which there are no women, or at least no women to whom anyone is committed. They are committed to each other. He grew up in the Corps of Pages. So he grew up without a family, and he planned never to marry. So he is a man who's outside the family, and he's outside the rest of society that the other men are in. And now Vronsky has left that way to be a man, and he's taken up another way to be a man, which is a dilettante artist. Also be aware of the role that Europe plays in this book and in 19th century Russia to some extent, that it was the escape, it was the other, it was the place to go when you needed a change from Russia. Russia was the real place, but Italy or Germany was a place to go for a reason to get away from Russia. So they take Kitty to Germany to recover. And then there's a lot of discussion and perception of the social circles of Russian people in Germany, because Russia is still the center for them. In Italy, they go to Italy because it's beautiful. They understand Italy represents a kind of culture that they don't have in Russia, but they are still drawn to Russian people. And then they have to come back to the real life, the real world of Russia. So Vronsky represents a sort of foray, a false foray into the world of art. And art is the idea of art, as Tolstoy continually does, is presented through a human being, through a person, a very flawed and ordinary kind of person. We're not asked to think that Mikhailov is exceptional in any way, except this fact that he has this drive that comes from the soul to present a kind of art to the world, which may or may not have any apprehension of it. But Tolstoy perceives that as a terribly important part of what we're given in the world. So that is art. And then we learn at the end that that palazzo is shabby and decrepit and squalid, and that what Vronsky thought he wasn't, and they leave it behind them. That's a false setting for them. So then I'm going to read a little bit about the marriage, the wedding. Marriage is one of the other important, that preceded it. I read it in the wrong order. So, sorry, my pages are not stuck together. Okay, so back a little bit before Anna and Vronsky leave, we're going to go back to Kitty and Levin's wedding. Because again, this was something that Levin, Tolstoy took very seriously. The idea of the wedding, the idea of marriage, the idea of having a family was something that was very central to Levin and to Tolstoy as well. But in this particular passage, we have a sense of what the wedding is like, what the marriage is like, the ceremony is like to Levin. but also this extraordinary entrance into Kitty's consciousness, this demonstration of empathy that Tolstoy is really unparalleled for. So this is on page 452. And I'm skipping around a little bit, but starts on 452. So one of the interesting things about the Russian Orthodox Church, and I've only been in a few of them, but they don't seem to have any pews. There's nowhere to sit. So the whole audience is standing for any kind of ceremony, which sort of, it's taxing and exhausting, but it also sort of forces you to engage physically as well as mentally and spiritually with the event. Filling the whole church from windows to vaults, broadly and harmoniously, the full chord of the invisible choir rose, swelled, paused for a moment, and slowly died away. Who hast brought into unity those who were sundered, and hast ordained for them an indissoluble bond of love? How profound these words are, and how well they correspond to what one feels at this moment, thought Levin. Does she feel it the same as I do? And turning, he met her eyes. And by the look in those eyes, he concluded that she understood it as he did. But that was not so. She had almost no understanding of the words of the service and did not even listening during the betrothal. She was unable to hear and understand them. So strong was the one feeling that filled her soul and was growing stronger and stronger. That feeling was the joy of the complete fulfillment of that which had already been accomplished in her soul a month and a half ago, and throughout all those 6 weeks had caused her joy and torment. On that day when, in her brown dress in the reception room of their house on the Arbat, she had silently gone up to him and given herself to him, in her soul, on that day and hour, there was accomplished a total break with her entire former life. And there began a completely different new life, totally unknown to her, while in reality the old one had gone on. Those 6 weeks had been a most blissful and tormenting time for her. All her life, all her desires and hopes were concentrated on this one man, still incomprehensible to her, with whom she was united by some feeling still more incomprehensible than the man himself, now drawing her to him, now repulsing her. And all the while she went on living in the circumstances of her former life. Living her old life, she was horrified at herself, at her total insuperable indifference to her entire past, to things, to habits, to people who had loved and still loved her, to her mother, who was upset by this indifference, to her dear, tender father, whom she had loved once more than anyone in the world. First, she would be horrified at this indifference, then she would rejoice over what had brought her to it. She could neither think nor desire anything outside her life with this man, but this new life had not yet begun, and she could not picture it clearly to herself. There was nothing but expectation, the fear and joy of the new and unknown. And now the expectation and the unknownness and remorse at the renouncing of her former life, all this was about to end, and the new was to begin. This new could not help being frightening, but frightening or not, it had already been accomplished 6 weeks earlier in her soul. Now was merely the sanctifying of what had long ago been performed. The priest took hold of Kitty's small ring with some difficulty, and asking for Levin's hand, placed it on the first joint of his finger. The servant of God, Konstantin, is betrothed to the handmaid of God, Katerina. And putting the big ring on Kitty's small, pink, pathetically frail finger, the priest repeated the same thing. Several times the betrothed couple tried to guess what they had to do, and each time they were mistaken, and the priest corrected them in a whisper. Finally, having done what was necessary, having crossed them with the rings, he again gave Kitty the big one and Levin the little one. Again, they became confused and twice handed the rings back and forth still without doing what was required. Levin felt more and more that all his thoughts about marriage, all his dreams about how he would arrange his life were mere childishness, and that it was something he had not understood before, and now understood still less, though it was being accomplished over him. Spasms were rising higher and higher in his breast, and disobedient tears were coming to his eyes. So again, Tolstoy mixes the notion of a deep spiritual engagement with the very mundane, the very physical, the two betrothed people trying to figure out what to do with the rings, being wrong, being clumsy, not getting it right. And Tolstoy delivers this message over and over to us, that we don't know how to lead our lives. We don't know how to do what's considered proper or what's expected of us. We're going to get it wrong. The important thing is to be engaged, to be a part of it, to feel it in your soul. And that's what happens during this wedding ceremony. So the next part is we're going to deal with death. And this is something that becomes increasingly important to Tolstoy during this period. While he's writing the book, he loses several family members, two of whom were the only people of his parents' generation who remembered his parents. So he feels a loss of connection. And he does lose a brother, like Levin's brother, to tuberculosis. But I want to read from page 496 because it addresses the notion of how women should lead their lives. And Tolstoy seems to really think that, again, all women have the same sets of responsibilities. Hidden from the wise and revealed unto babes and the imprudent. So Levin thought about his wife as he talked with her that evening. Levin was thinking of the gospel saying, not because he considered himself wise. He did not consider himself wise, but he could not help knowing that he was more intelligent than his wife, or Agafya Mikhailovna. And he could not help knowing that when he thought about death, he thought about it with all the forces of his soul. He also knew that many great masculine minds, whose thoughts about it he had read, had pondered death, and yet did not know 100th part of what his wife and Agafya Mikhailovna knew about it. Different as these two women were, Agafya Mikhailovna, you remember she's the housekeeper, and Katya, as his brother Nikolai called her, they were perfectly alike in this. Both unquestionably knew what life was and what death was. And though they would have been unable to answer and would not even have understood the questions that presented themselves to Levin, neither had any doubt about the meaning of this phenomenon and looked at it in exactly the same way, not only between themselves, but sharing this view with millions of other people. The proof that they knew firmly what death was lay in their knowing without a moment's doubt how to act with dying people and not being afraid of them. While Levin and others, though they could say a lot about death, obviously did not know because they were afraid of death and certainly had no idea what needed to be done when people were dying. If Levin had been alone now with his brother Nikolai, he would have looked at him with horror and would have waited with still greater horror, unable to do anything else. But Kitty obviously did not think about herself and had no time to. She told Nikolai about herself and about her wedding, and she smiled and pitied and caressed him and spoke of cases of recovery, and it all turned out well, which meant that she knew. The proof that what she and Agafya Mikhailovna did was not instinctive, animal, unreasoning, was that besides physical care, the alleviation of suffering, both Agafya Mikhailovna and Kitty demanded something more important for the dying man, something that had nothing in common with physical conditions. Agafya Mikhailovna, speaking of an old man who had died, said, well, thank God he took communion, got anointed. God grant everybody such a death. In the same way, Katya, beside all her cares about linen, bedsores, drink, persuaded the sick man on the very first day of the need to take communion and be anointed. So Tolstoy introduces us to this notion, which is, like many things in Tolstoy, it's paradoxical, because we have a sense that he feels as deep, kind empathy for all creatures. We're going to get to those in which we're empathetic to animals as well as humans. But the great sense of empathy that Levin feels for Kitty and that Tolstoy feels for Anna comes up short in these passages in which he talks about them as though their souls are limited and their understanding is limited. And he says flat out that Levin knows absolutely that he's more intelligent than Kitty. And he gives no reason for that. It's simply that she is a woman and he is a man. And it's one of the things in this book that draw me up short. It's hard to reconcile with that, with his enormous sense of understanding and respect for human nature, the fact that he believes women simply are not as intelligent as men. He also delivers them this capacity for understanding of death, the actual happening of death, the physical change and transformation that takes place, something that he as a man thinks that he's capable of thinking about, but he can't deal with. And so there's the moment when Kitty asks him to turn his brother over, and he's afraid to reach under the covering. He's afraid to learn what's under there, the terror of the dying body, the fear of touching flesh, which is on its way to another kind of existence, is something he doesn't understand and he's terrified of. And he gives Kitty a largeness of spirit, and she is someone who feels no fear of the dying. She understands how to be compassionate to Nikolai. She understands how to take care of him physically. She learned all this when she was at the spa, remember? So she was sort of an intern when she was there. She was an apprentice. But this is part of her life as Levin sees it. She is one of the millions of people, women, who understand what this passage is and how to deal with it physically and emotionally. So this is another example of how to be a man. A man is someone who does not know how to deal with death. Men have great minds. They can consider death. They can understand it in ways that require their intelligence and their capacity to have abstract thoughts. But men don't do this. They don't do death. They don't understand how to deal with it in a way that Kitty, who is brave and loving, can. And he gives her enormous affection and respect for this, but it separates them. He is a man and she's a woman here. So I'll do two more short readings. And one is Anna's visit to her son, Seryozha, and this is page 532. The next day at 8 o'clock in the morning, Anna got out of a hired carriage by herself and rang at the big entrance of her former home. "Go and see what she wants. It's some lady," said Kapitonich, not dressed yet, in a coat and galoshes, looking out of the window at a lady in a veil. The porter's helper, a young fellow Anna did not know, opened the door for her. She came in and, taking a 3-ruble bill from her muff, hurriedly put it into his hand. "Seryozha, Sergei Alexeyevich," she said, and started forward. Having examined the bill, the porter's helper stopped her at the inside glass door. "Who do you want?" he asked. She did not hear his words and made no reply. Noticing the unknown woman's perplexity, Kapitonich himself came over, let her in, and asked her what she wanted. "I've come from Prince Skorodumov to see Sergei Alexeyevich," she said. "He's not up yet," the porter said, looking at her intently. Anna had never expected that the totally unchanged interior of the front hall of the house in which she had lived for 9 years would affect her so strongly. One after another, joyful and painful memories arose in her soul, and for a moment she forgot why she was there. "Would you care to wait?" said Kapitonich, helping her off with her fur coat. After taking it, he looked into her face, recognized her, and silently made a low bow. "Please come in, Your Excellency," he said. She wanted to say something, but her voice refused to produce any sounds. Giving the old man a look of guilty entreaty, she went up the stairs with quick, light steps. All bent over, his galoshes tripping on the steps, Kapitonich ran after her, trying to head her off. "The tutor's there and may not be dressed. I'll announce you." Anna went up the familiar stairs, not understanding. "Here, to the left, please. Excuse the untidiness. He's in the former sitting room now," the porter said. "Allow me, just a moment, Your Excellency. I'll peek in," he said. Getting ahead of her, he opened the tall door and disappeared. Anna stood waiting. "He's just woken up," the porter said, coming out again. And as the porter said it, Anna heard the sound of a child's yawn. From the sound of the yawn alone, she recognized her son and could see him alive before her. Let me in, go away," she said, and went through the tall doorway. To the right of the door stood a bed, and on the bed a boy sat upright in nothing but an unbuttoned shirt, his little body arched, stretching and finishing a yawn. As his lips came together, they formed themselves into a blissfully sleepy smile. And with that smile, he slowly and sweetly fell back again. "Seryozha," she whispered, approaching him inaudibly. While they had been apart, and with that surge of love she had been feeling all the time recently, she had imagined him as a 4-year-old boy, the way she had loved him most. Now he was not even the same as when she had left him. He was still further from being a 4-year-old, was taller and thinner. What was this? How thin his face was, how short his hair, how long his arms. He had changed since she left him. But this was he, with his shape of head, his lips, his soft neck and broad shoulders. "Seryozha," she repeated just over the child's ear. He propped himself on his elbow, turned his tousled head from side to side as if looking for something, and opened his eyes. For several seconds, he gazed quietly and questioningly at his mother, standing motionless before him, then suddenly smiled blissfully, and closing his sleepy eyes again, fell, not back now, but towards her arms. "Seryozha, my sweet boy," she said, choking and putting her arms around his plump belly. "Mama," he said, moving under her arms so as to touch them with different parts of his body. Smiling sleepily, his eyes still shut, he shifted his plump hands from the back of the bed to her shoulders, snuggled up to her, enveloping her with that sweet, sleepy smell and warmth that only children have, and began rubbing his face against her neck and shoulders. "I knew it," he said, opening his eyes. "Today is my birthday. I knew you'd come. I'll get up now." So that passage to me is incredibly moving because it shows Anna's fear, her deep love for the child. And remember, this is the engine that has been behind half of Anna's actions throughout the book. The very first time we meet Anna, she's been talking to Vronsky's mother about how much she misses her son. She has never been separated him for a single night in his whole life. And her fear of losing Seryozha is a silent drumbeat in her conversations with Vronsky. She's so frightened of losing him earlier on that she doesn't dare say the words. So we have a sense of Anna's tremendous maternal drive and her emotional connection to Seryoja and what she's gone through in order to get this very brief and painfully brief meeting with her son, how she has endured this excoriating and malicious response from Karenina's new friend, Lydia, who refuses to allow Anna to come. And we see in this scene how dependent she is now on the goodwill of other people. At any moment, the servants can come and turn her out of this house. If she runs into her former husband, he can order her out of the building. She is in the thrall of other people for the rest of her life in Seryoza. She has no rights over the sight of her son. So I find that passage incredibly powerful, and it reminds us of the depths of Anna's character. She is not simply a woman who has fallen in love with a lover and run off with him. She is a woman that has a tremendous, excruciatingly powerful bond with her son. Now I'll read one last short passage, page 546 and 7, which is Anna who goes to the opera against Vronsky's advice. Next to a lady in a turban and a bald old man who blinked angrily into the lenses of the moving opera glasses, Vronsky suddenly saw Anna's head, proud, strikingly beautiful, and smiling in its frame of lace. She was in the 5th baignoire, 20 steps away. She was sitting at the front and turning slightly, was saying something to Yashvin. The poise of her head on her beautiful broad shoulders, the glow of restrained excitement in her eyes and her whole face reminded him of her, exactly as he had seen her at the ball in Moscow. But his sense of this beauty was quite different. His feeling for her now had nothing mysterious in it. And therefore her beauty, though it attracted him more strongly, at the same time offended him. She was not looking in his direction, but Vronsky could sense that she had seen him. When Vronsky again looked in that direction through his opera glasses, he noticed that Princess Varvara was especially red, laughed unnaturally, and kept turning to look at the neighboring box, while Anna, tapping on the red velvet with a folded fan, gave off somewhere and did not see or want to see what was happening in that box. Yashvin's face wore the expression in it had when he was losing at cards. He sulkily put the left side of his mustache farther and farther into his mouth, glancing sidelong at the same neighboring box. In this box to the left were the Kardashovs. Vronsky knew them and knew that Anna was acquainted with them. Madame Kardashov, a thin, small woman, was standing in her box, her back turned to Anna, and putting on a cape that her husband was holding for her. Her face was pale and cross, and she was saying something excitedly. Kardashov, a fat, bald gentleman, kept looking round at Anna and trying to calm his wife. When his wife left, the husband lingered for a long time, his eyes seeking Anna's, apparently wishing to bow to her. But Anna, obviously ignoring him on purpose, turned round and was saying something to Yashvin, who leaned his cropped head towards her. Kardashov went out without bowing, and the box was left empty. Vronsky did not understand precisely what had taken place between the Kardashovs and Anna, but he realized that it had been humiliating for her. He realized it both from what he had seen and most of all from Anna's look. He knew she had gathered her last forces in order to maintain the role she had taken upon herself. And in this role of ostensible calm, she succeeded fully. People who did not know her and her circle, and who had not heard all the expressions of commiseration, indignation, and astonishment from women that she should allow herself to appear in society and appear so conspicuously in her lace attire and in all her beauty, admired the calm and beauty of this woman and did not suspect that she was experiencing the feelings of a person in the pillory. So this scene of Anna at the opera mirrors. Remember, we've talked about different scenes that are twinned or that echo or that mirror other scenes in the book, and this scene certainly echoes the scene of Anna at the ball. It's a ball she didn't mean to go to. Remember, she was talked into going. She said no, she was too old to go to balls, but everyone else was going, so she went. She goes alone without her husband to the ball. She is conspicuous at the ball for her beauty. She stands out against everyone else at that scene. And it's when Vronsky falls in love with her and when Kitty realizes that Anna has ruined her life, really. At that moment, she has ruined it. And in this scene, Anna goes to the opera against the advice of her lover, displays herself in all her beauty in a very conspicuous place in the opera, and comes to realize, is informed by society that she has been shunned. She is now banned from the world that she knew. She is forever a pariah there. Her Betsy, her closest friend, refuses to come and see her. Vronsky's sister-in-law refuses to come and see her. Betsy will only invite her when no one else is going to be at her house. And this moment at the opera means that even the outsiders in her circle, people who are not close to her, will not acknowledge her as a member of the society in which she grew up. She has been banished from the world she knows. Just as when she went to Karenina's house, she realizes that she is dependent on the kindness of the servants and that she will never have the right to see her son. Here she realizes she is dependent on the rights of all of society, and all of society has turned its back to her, that she will be an outcast. So her beauty is described similarly to her beauty at the ball, but now she's the reverse of that woman. She is no longer a woman that draws the eyes of the world in admiration and love. She is a woman who draws scorn and vitriol. And that's the future that Anna has to look forward to. Okay, so can we unmute people? And I will so somebody asked why there was no description of the actual birth of Anna's child. We will get to a birth. Tolstoy engages very deeply with a birth later on. And as I say, it's living with Tolstoy, reading the book that he's written is like being next to somebody with a telescope or a microscope, because when he focuses on a subject, he focuses on it absolutely, and we see it in great, great detail. And when he's not focused on it, he gives us this enormous sweep. It's like when he describes that Dolly's wedding or marriage, he says, it didn't work. We're given the whole first chapter about the terror, the horror of Dolly's marriage failing. And Anna comes to help fix it. But then in 2 sentences, many chapters later, we're told the bond didn't hold, the marriage had failed, Steva was still unfaithful, and that's that. We don't hear another word about it. We don't know when that took place. So Tolstoy, this is velocity again. He simply, when he wants to go fast, we will go fast. Okay, now here someone says, I thought we stopped at a different chapter. Just so you all know, so it's here, we are moving now to the parts that Tolstoy used to define the book himself. I was doing page numbers before and chapters, but now I'm just doing parts. So that we're doing part 5 now, we'll do part 6 next week. Okay.
Roxana.
Yeah, hi, Robin.
Hi, I thank you for calling on me, because I have to say that I just need to know how, having read Madame Bovary with you recently, I just can't get past how horrible he is to Anna. It's unbearable to me. I think it's so, in general, it's so punishing to women I do not feel that way about Flaubert. And I know it sounds like a stupid question, but it's really, my heart aches from it.
Well, so it is aching. He does make our hearts ache, but so I won't say that he doesn't, he does. But also, he wouldn't make our heart ache if we didn't love Anna. And he's creating a character that engages us so completely that we can't help but rage at what brings her down. He creates what brings her down, but he also creates the woman. And Anna, if I were to compare her to Madame Bovary, is so much richer as a character. She is someone who, I mean, I can't help but compare her, because when I teach my course at Hunter, I first teach Madame Bovary, and then I teach this book. And so the comparison between her and Emma is so enormous. And this session is not meant to be about Madame Bovary, but really, I think I am so much more engaged by Anna, and it's he that does that to us. He's ripping our heart out, but it's he who makes us so engaged. Anna is a tremendously sympathetic character for me. I find her deeply, deeply engaging.
You answered the question by saying, I think my comparison was, I don't feel as that Flaubert is as cruel to Emma, but I think exactly as you said, it's because he's created a character that we hold separate, if only for her motherhood. And I think that's what this part, the fact that Anna can't see her own child is, but you're right, it's because Tolstoy has created a woman who's so lovable.
It's also, remember that Tolstoy is challenging the norms of his period. And one of the things that he's challenging is the idea of divorce. And divorce was very, very difficult to achieve during this time. There's something like, I can't remember the figures, but there's something like 700 people in all of Russia got divorces in the 5 years between 1860 and 65. I mean, it's a tiny, tiny number. It was very, very difficult to do. And Tolstoy's sister was in a similar situation. Also, by the way, something like 4 of those divorces, of those 700, were in Tolstoy's own family. Mm-hmm. So, but he's also challenging the idea of divorce. He's challenging the idea of divorce, but he's also celebrating and supporting the idea of marriage as something that should not be damaged. But his sister had a similar situation. He had only one sister. I think she was Maria. She was married to an older aristocrat. I think he was a distant cousin. It was not a happy marriage. She had several children with him. And then she fell in love with a Swedish aristocrat and ran off with him and had a child with him. And then he left her. And so she had this illegitimate child that had been born outside Russia in the other place, that other territory. And she did not dare bring her back because of the stigma attached. So she was writing to him during this time. And she was torn apart by the idea of never coming back to Russia or leaving her child in a foreign country. And she was, and her husband wouldn't give her a divorce. So Tolstoy was trying to arrange for this divorce to take place. So he was right in the thick of things. And as Tolstoy always does, he is giving us every side of it. He's showing us what he expects from women, which is what Kitty delivers to Levin as a wife, and what Dolly does more sadly. But he's also showing us what it might be to be Anna and the trap that she's in, that society creates. So just as he challenges the Russian Orthodox Church, which became a much bigger issue for him later on, but he's challenging it a bit here. In suggesting that it's for Levin, the value of it is based on the fact of, telling children how the earth was created. Remember, this is before Darwin, and the idea that the priest himself was so sympathetic as a human being. So he's challenging everything. He's asking us to consider these questions.
But yeah. Roxana, in sort of following that, this is kind of a silly question, I think, but I mean, it's so, what I find irritating is that maybe he's challenging these norms, but all the other aristocratic women like Betsy are having it. Everybody seems to be having an affair. So nobody else is shunned except for Anna. So is that just because we're inside her head, obviously, but
No, it's a really good point. And other people have made this same point. The difference is, remember how much Tolstoy cares about integrity and authenticity. Anna will not tell lies. Betsy lies to her husband to his face. Everyone knows she lies to him. She hasn't left him. She hasn't walked out the door and abandoned her children and gone off with a soldier, with an officer. That's what Anna does. So she flouts all the rules of society. Betsy and her ilk all obey the rules of society. Everyone at that croquet party is having an affair, an illicit affair, but they're not leaving their partners. They're not forcing society's nose in it. They are doing it discreetly. And that's what, remember, Vronsky's mother would have been fine if he had had a discreet affair that everyone knew about, but they were not forced to know about. But what she's done is shame her husband. She's flouted the rules of the church. She's flouted the rules of civil society. It's against the law. Adultery is against the law. You can be put in jail for adultery. So she is very deliberately forcing everyone to make a choice. So that's the difference between her and Betsy. And Tolstoy makes that deliberately. I agree. He wants us to consider those, make those comparisons. She's authentic. She's a woman of honor. She can't tolerate a life in which she is constantly deceiving the world.
Hi, do you see me?
Yes, hi.
My name is Jackie. Hi, I'm enjoying all this, but something about Anna confuses me. I understand all that you're saying. I'm sympathetic with her position in society, but this role of motherhood. And I found two passages. One is on page 538, and the other is earlier on page, let me see, I did mark it. Page 464. On 464, she's with her little girl, M. Vronsky. And it says, this little girl, the child.
We haven't gotten there yet.
Oh, what? 434, 464?
Oh, sorry. I thought you were talking about later.
It's with Vronsky.
Yeah.
You know, she's so attached to this little girl, she rarely remembered her son. And that kind of bothered me because that seemed to be a very, very big issue. So yeah, then I won't bother to cite what comes up later, when she sort of reverses. But how could she barely remember him? And then I have to bring in Vronsky's sense of paternity. I think I put it in the chat box. There's no mention of him and this child, which is his child.
I know. So excellent points. And it's really weird that it says that she hardly remembers her son. I mean, and I have two responses to that. One is, we can read that as her, it's too painful for her to think of her son. It's simply too painful to think she's not going to see him again, and that this is going to be her life in Italy. And so she puts him out of her mind. The other is that Tolstoy wrote this over 4 years and he stopped writing it several times. So I think he forgot things that he had said.
Probably.
I just think that's probably right.
Okay.
So at this moment, that's not what he was focusing on. But I also can believe that it was so painful to her that she had separated it from her consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Roxana,
Yeah.
I am just so struck by the stream of consciousness technique that Tolstoy uses. Was he interested in psychology? Was it something that we find in novels of this time in Russia and abroad in England? Maybe you could comment on that, because he just gets into the interior thinking of these characters with such power and emotion, and for a writer to be able to render it at a visceral level like that just claims my heart.
So it's a great comment, and I think I talked about this a little bit in the first session. But he really is a sort of a proto-modernist. And so when I teach this at Hunter, my class is called Introduction to the Modern, and we are moving towards Virginia Woolf and James Joyce and Proust, who do that, who move into stream of consciousness. But Tolstoy is really doing it. And so there's passage after passage in which we become the character, like Levin when he's transformed by joy in the hotel before he goes to ask for Kitty's hand, and all these, when Anna is overcome with emotion, all of them, you have the sense that you are inside that person's heart and soul and mind. And it's extraordinary. I don't think that there's any point in our asking ourselves if he was interested in psychology any more than if Shakespeare was, or Wagner. They're artists who were completely engaged by the human condition. And that pushing towards empathy that all of them do, Shakespeare, Wagner, and Tolstoy, is what makes their work so great. And there's no way to figure out how it happened. They just are artists who needed to do that. They needed to explore the depths of each character's feeling and sensibility as they move through these scenes. So what Tolstoy does, your question is a really good one. Stream of consciousness had not happened yet. So he's really a pioneer in that sense. He's doing something that wasn't done in this way yet, so but would become much more visible in the next century. Great question.
Thank you.
Roxana, I think one thing that struck me too on that note about getting into the psychology of the individual characters is that it's very modern in the sense that characters are having conversations with themselves. There's the alter ego in the modern parlance of the therapy couch, having these conversations, and I think that's very, very modern.
It's a really good point. It's a sort of an awareness of consciousness that we don't expect for that period. Yeah, they're definitely having conversations with themselves. Anyone with another question?
Roxana Posco,
Hi.
would you comment a little bit about just after Levin gets married, his complete reversal, if you will, or made aware of how different marriage is from what he thought?
Yes.
I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I had considered reading this famous passage, which you all noticed, about how marriage was like a boat. It was like watching somebody somebody standing on shore looking at someone in a boat. And in fact, I marked it. It's wonderful. And a friend of mine, my daughters, had it read at her wedding. It's on page 479. Levin had been married for 3 months. He was happy, but not at all in the way he'd expected. At every step, he found disenchantment with his old dream and a new, unexpected enchantment. He was happy, but having entered upon family life, he saw at every step that it was not what he had imagined. At every step, he felt like a man who, after having admired a little boat going smoothly and happily on a lake, then got into this boat. He saw that it was not enough to sit straight without rocking. He also had to keep in mind, not forgetting for a minute, where he was going, that there was water underneath, that he had to row, and his unaccustomed hands hurt, that it was easy only to look at, but doing it, while very joyful, was also very difficult. So it's a great comment, Bosco. And once again, Levin enters into something with a spirit of curiosity and exploration and a deep sense of purpose. And he finds things that he doesn't expect. He always does this. And Tolstoy brings the physical into it. We won't forget those unaccustomed hands on the oars, how he has to figure out where he's going, how it looked from the shore and how it feels from the boat. So he always brings in the physical, the sense of being a human being in the world. And this, he refuses to idealize anything. So having having spent time in Kitty's mind during the ceremony, and remember, that's Tolstoy's idea of what Kitty's thinking. It's kind of funny to me that Kitty is only thinking about this joyous and frightening newness, but Levin is allowed to think about God and think about the ceremony and think about the people there. Kitty is just transfixed by this notion of the new life that she's about to enter into. But Tolstoy always brings these questions in through the human physical presence. So everything, the wedding ceremony with the hands that Levin and Kitty can't remember what fingers to use, where to put the rings. That's part of that ceremony, as well as the fear and the spiritual excitement. And so his experience of marriage has to do with the physical, the physical detail of those unaccustomed hands and the struggle to get the boat to go where you want it to go. And we understand from that Levin is like any newlywed. He's having trouble with fitting the reality into his expectations. But thank you for asking it, because that passage is so much fun.
Roxana, hi, it's Judith. Thank you so much for this course. I just wanted to add one more little thing about the scene with the artist, because I think for me, I was really struck by Tolstoy's vulnerability, that he thinks these people don't know anything about art, but their approbation seems to be exceedingly important to him. And I just thought it was just a window into Tolstoy's still needing our approval despite his extraordinary body of work.
I think you're absolutely right. And that's one of the things that interested me about that whole section, Mikhailov and Galishnev and Vronsky, these three approaches to art. Galishnev is a writer, but really has nothing to say. Vronsky styles himself as an artist, but has nothing to say. Mikhailov is a true artist. And as you say, he's completely vulnerable, because when an artist is creating art, he's doing it for other people. He's doing it to make a connection with someone else. And if other people understand it, he or she feels that they've succeeded. And if no one does understand it, if they think it's worthless, you can't help, you, the artist, can't help but feel that you've utterly failed. You've failed in your mission. You've failed as a human being. You failed in this task that was so central to your character and to the necessity of your existence. Is you failed. So I'm glad you raised that. He's showing exactly that. And Tolstoy himself, remember, sounds like Mikhailov, grumpy and ill-tempered and bad at talking to his clients. Tolstoy turns people away when they come to interview him. He's rude to them. And he was very sensitive to criticism sometimes was completely indifferent. He was outraged when Dostoevsky wrote something critical about this book. So there is this sense of the idea that the artist must do something without reference to the public. It must come from the soul. And so it must be done with complete indifference to the rest of the world. And yet, if the rest of the world condemns it, the artist has failed. So right. It's a tremendous paradox. And you're right. I think it refers immediately to Tolstoy.
And if you make a great work of art, it might be just like at the opera, where in fact, no one is paying attention to what's on the stage so much as they're paying attention to Anna up in the box. So, and
also true. Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a question from Bettina in the chat, Roxana.
Okay, so I'm struck with how so many of the characters fail at reading or dealing with emotions. This is in the chat for everyone. Why does everyone operate in relation to social strictures, but not emotional ones. I mean, what you say is true. There are people who don't understand each other. Vronsky doesn't understand. Vronsky, remember, is when Anna is so terrified of losing her son, Vronsky is not only not a father, he's not even married. So, and he didn't have a father really himself. So he's not even considering that as a possibility. So for me, what Tolstoy is doing, it makes perfect sense, because I don't know about you, but there are many times when I miss emotional clues, and afterwards I realize what someone meant to say or was really thinking or feeling, and I missed it because of something I was thinking or feeling. So for me, this is a very realistic way to present these scenes. I just think that's what humans do. They miss clues, and particularly when things are so much hangs in the balance. The tenser you are, the less ready you are to think about other people. So in the scenes in which people are the most emotionally stressed are the ones in which they are most likely going to make the biggest mistakes.
Roxana, you made such a key comment about the wedding, that there are no pews in the Russian Orthodox Church. Everyone is part of the drama. But to me, it was just a great human comedy. It had everything. It had all the pre-wedding doubts. It had the lost shirt, so wearing the dirty shirt. It had the ceremony and the two difference. Could you just make a little comment on this tremendous human comedy, which is that wedding in the church?
I know. I wish I could have read I mean, there was too much. I couldn't read the whole thing, but you're absolutely right. Tolstoy just makes, that could be a whole book, just that wedding. There is so much in that scene. The wonderful asides of the other people, mostly women who are thinking about getting married themselves, and we go into their minds and their comments with the men they're with and to each other about the clothes. And the incident of the shirt actually happened to Tolstoy. It's a great, it's a wonderful, it's so deeply human, so deeply credible that's just the kind of thing that happens at weddings. So you're caught up in this kind of tumbleweed of emotions and a sense of crisis. There's this approaching time is involved. Everyone is waiting. It's really important. And again, there's always this sense with Tolstoy of humans not knowing exactly how to rise to meet the challenge, whether it's emotional or psychological or intellectual. There's always this sense of uncertainty. How do you do it? I don't know how to do it. Tolstoy tells us that over and over again. I don't know how to do this. So although Levin has this manservant who's been charged with packing his clothes, he doesn't think of putting out a fresh shirt. And one of the things about this, one of the many wonderful little tiny details is Levin says, I can't wear the shirt I've got on, which is dirty, with these new fancy low-cut waistcoats. And that makes you think of at a certain point, men wore vests that came like this across there. So the jacket is out here, but the vest came like that. But now, if you think of a man wearing a black tie, or it's very low cut. So his shirt, his dirty shirt, his crumpled shirt that he'd been wearing all day would be exposed by that low cut waistcoat. Anyway, it's a wonderful scene. And it reminds me of Levin, the dog, jumping up on the table because he's just twirling, shouting at people, and it's a mess. And there's no way to fix it. I mean, there's never any final solution in Tolstoy. You can't do everything right. You're just not going to be able to. And so there are these passages like that in which Levin goes crazy trying to get the shirt ready, and everybody at the church thinks Kitty has been abandoned. And then you move into these beautiful, beautiful passages that are full of grace and majesty and a sense of expansion of the soul. And that's where, you think being human is a great thing. Tolstoy allows us to sort of, that's why I read out of order that passage of the invisible choir singing that chord that swells and fills the entire church, giving us a sense of mystery and majesty and the presence of the soul, which is a really important part of Tolstoy. So every scene contains, it seems to me, all of these elements, and Tolstoy is reminding us of the chaos and the turbulence and the fear and the joy of being human.
Roxana, one of the things that amused me is that Stepan goes into the country to prepare the country house for his wife, and he does the curtains, etc. But they get there and nothing is working. And a little later on, what we learn is that Levin asks Stepan to do his own country house for himself and Kitty. So Stepan did such a wonderful job of preparing for his wife. Those two they're apart, but they're just wonderfully connected.
Yes, it's right. Steve really made a name for himself as an interior decorator with his first round. Yeah.
Right.
So, other comments?
Yes.
Hi, Franny.
Hi. I was just so happy to see Kitty coming into her own. And in the potential horror of the deathbed room and the chaotic disturbance at the end of the brother's life, Kitty is just pitch perfect. And it seemed to me that Tolstoy really gave her a fair shake.
I completely agree. And so this is why I defend Tolstoy. I mean, you can say he was dismissive of women's capabilities, but I don't think he thought of it that way. I think he really enormously admired what he saw as something that he was unable to achieve, and does give Kitty the role of ministering angel. She really is an extraordinary presence in that scene, and she comes into her own. She has skills and sympathies that he can't possibly match. So it's very respectful, that scene, I think, and celebratory and very loving and tender. So one of the things I'm glad you raised that scene, because I meant to mention this. Be aware, we've talked about twinning and echoes. Be aware that Nikolai's, his companion, Maria, I think she's Nikolaevna, but this woman that he travels with, to whom he is not married, she's a woman of ill repute. He took her out of a house of prostitution, and she is sort of a thorn in his side. And Tolstoy had a brother who had exactly that kind of partner. And she's a woman of great kindness and diligence and conscience, but she is shunned by society. And the word slut is used. Levin says he doesn't want his wife to be in the presence of a slut. And then when Maria arrives, she sees Kitty, whom she knows is a married woman, and she steps back. She doesn't even want to stand in the doorway of a respectable woman's room. So you get a sense of that. And you hear Nikolai, when we first meet her, he says, I want you to treat her like my wife. I consider her my wife. We hear echoes of that later with Vronsky. And although Maria Nikolaevna does not occupy the same social circles that Anna does, we see Anna treated in the same way that Maria Nikolaevna was treated. She is going to be shunned in that same terrible, definitive way. And we're given that notion of what he calls a slut in this horrible hotel. It smells, it's dirty, Nikolai is dying, and here's this woman that cannot be accepted in society. Kitty, to her great credit, is utterly kind and pays no attention to that stigma. But it's a warning bell. It's a warning for Anna.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that scene, where Kitty does everything right, not just at the deathbed, but in how she treats, his mistress and her bravery and all of that. And so the question is Levin Tolstoy, or is Levin a character that Tolstoy is somewhat mocking? So that Levin comparing, he always mentions Kitty in the same breath as Agafia Mikhailovna, the servant. So he's sort of putting her on that level of, these women have certain instincts. I don't know how to explain it, but it's nothing great. But is that Tolstoy speaking, or is that him a little bit mocking Levin, because Tolstoy is describing Kitty in a much greater way than that?
That's a really good question. I don't know the answer. I think sometimes he's one and sometimes he's the other, and I think they're mixed. But just the way he wants to mock Mikhailovna, the painter, he can't bring himself to make him a completely estimable person. He's not. So he certainly won't allow Levin to be someone that we admire all the time. We half the time he's a fool. Yeah, I mean, he's not a fool, but he's comically inept. So, and I have the sense that Tolstoy is writing himself in that part, but I don't know how far it goes. It's a really good question.
Kitty seems like such an immature girl through so much of the book, and then in this scene, in this whole several days, she's just magnificent. And
yeah, and she's also magnificent. You're absolutely right. She's very young, but the scene before the wedding, when Levin suddenly decides that she couldn't possibly want to marry him, and he goes to her house and he says, "I just come to let you out. It's 4 hours before they're going to get married." She says, what are you talking about? What's the matter? He says, no, I just want to give you the chance. There's still time. We can turn the... And she rises to the occasion. She's completely adult. She says, she sends the maid away. She says, go away. We have to talk. And she just talks him down. She's the grown-up in the room. She's completely the grown-up. So you have the sense there that she is capable of things that he has no knowledge of at that point. But she is the person that we're going to come to admire and respect even more. Yeah. Okay, guys, we are nearly at quarter of. So thank you all for coming. Next week, we will do part 6. Send questions to the library if you have them. I'm trying to keep track of everything, and bring questions and just say them out loud if we don't get to it otherwise. And thank you all for the donations you've made. We so appreciate it. And that's all. I'll see you next week.
Okay.
Roxana.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Roxana.